In this video, we're going to show you how to install an inner tie rod on your Ford Mustang located on your steering rack. Using your 19mm socket, loosen and remove your lug nuts. With the lug nuts removed, remove the wheel and set it aside. And on the top right here on our ball joint area, there's going to be a castle nut with a cotter pin in here. Now normally you go ahead and push down the back side of that cotter pin. We're going to use a pair of pliers, some cutters, and just kind of like push down on that. The next thing we want to do is pull that cotter pin out if possible. Now sometimes it's too rusted. We're going to give it a shot here. So we put a pair of cutters here. I'm going to pinch and rock forward. We're going to try and walk that cotter pin out. In this case here, it doesn't want to come out. It's pretty rusted in there. We do our best to grab pieces of that cotter pin and get them removed. I was able to cut the back side out. You're just going to continue to work on this. In some cases, you can use a small punch to go ahead and work the remainder pieces of the cotter pin out through the back side. There's the remainder of the cotter pins there. Go ahead and use a socket to go ahead and loosen that nut. Use an 18mm socket to loosen this nut. Now we remove the nut. We're going to thread that back on just a few threads. We use a 21mm wrench. We want to loosen our jam nut here. And it's a bit rusted even though we applied some rust penetrant to this here. Now that we have our jam nut loose, let's go ahead and separate our tie rod end from the knuckle. At this point here, I want to go ahead and strike the knuckle right here, and this should release the tie rod end out. Now what we're going to do is unthread our tie rod end from the inner tie rod, and we want to count the amount of full revolutions it takes for this to come off of our inner tie rod. That way there, when we install the new one, we're going to thread on the same amount, and that'll give us a basic preliminary setting for an alignment so that once the job is done, we can drive it down to an alignment shop and get that completed properly. 22. You can always take a crayon and write that down somewhere on a piece of paper, but that'll give us our basic setting there. With the outer tie rod removed, we're going to remove our jam nut. On the bellows boot, there's going to be a clamp. You can use a basic pair of pliers. Pinch that and open up that clamp, slide that off. Moving to the inboard portion of our bellows boot, there is a band clamp here. This band clamp is a one-time use, so we'll have to source a replacement strap of some sort to secure this. I'm gonna put a tool on there and just tap that off. We want to just break that off. Remove that. Go ahead and slide that boot out. I'm just going to try and work that back a little bit and slide that off. Next, we need to unthread our inner tie rod from the rack shaft. Slide this off, and we'll give that a cleaning. You want to go ahead and inspect the threads, make sure everything looks good. While you're doing this here, also need to inspect to see if you have any power steering fluid coming out of the rack itself. If it is, the rack seal is damaged inside and that needs to be replaced, or the rack needs to be replaced. But ours is in good shape. We just have grease in there, which is perfect. I'm going to install the little collar here. Install our inner tie rod end. I want to make sure that's good and tight. Now when tightening this down, you want to make sure that it's good and tight and that the inner tie rod is seated up against the shaft. There are two threaded locks right here. We're going to use our Allen wrench to go ahead and snug those out, or snug them down. Go ahead and make sure that's bottomed out. There's one directly on the other side. Now that we have our two set screws bottomed out, let's go ahead and add some grease to the inner joint. Go ahead and add some grease into the joint. Install your boot. Going to install our securing strap here. Going to install our inner clamp here. Let's tighten down our clamp or our strap, and then we'll snip that flush. Good. Install your jam nut. Install the outer tie rod end, counting in 22 complete revolutions. Now adjust your ball joint just enough we can get that lined up into the knuckle. Push it up and in, and we're going to start the castle nut on the top. Now, when installing the castle nut, you want to pay attention to the hole in the top of the ball joint stud itself, because we're going to have to put a cotter pin into this. We want to make sure that hole lines up with the castle nut on the top. Let's tighten down our castle nut. Now we want to go ahead and torque this to 41 foot-pounds. Now at this point, our next step is to make sure that one of these notches in our castle nut lines up with the hole in the ball joint stud. Now if it does not line up, you're going to go ahead and continue to tighten the nut in small increments until the next notch lines up with the hole in the ball joint stud. And take a new cotter pin, feed that in. Once we have that in, we're going to go ahead and use our pliers. We're going to pull the upper tab up and over. Tap that down. Snip off the excess. We're going to snip off the excess on the extended piece on the back side. Let's tighten down our jam nut. Let's go ahead and tighten down our jam nut. Make sure that's good and tight. The next thing I'd like to do is go ahead and grab this outer tie rod and twist this up. I like to make sure that our tie rod is nice and level here, not twisted up or down. Now at this point here, we're going to go ahead and install your wheel, bring the vehicle down to a local alignment shop and get that squared away. Install your wheel. Go ahead and get your lug nut started. And once we have those started, we can go ahead and snug those down. Once you have these snug, go ahead and lower the vehicle down and let's torque those into position. Let's go ahead and torque our lug nuts to 95 foot-pounds. Go ahead and install your center cap.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.